All right, those of you that have had my class know this already, but we're going to start with RoboCop. All right, so go to your next empty page, and at the top you're going to write chapter 20. And before we get into that, I'm going to introduce RoboCop. Anything that is green, you are going to write down. Anything that is in any other color, you don't have to write down, but it's good information. Anything that's green is highly likely to be on the test. Anything that there's so much to cover, and I have to pick and choose what we have to cover, and everything else is absolutely important. And the ideas and concepts of other things that I discuss that are not in green will be on the test, but it may not necessarily be that image that's on the test, that artwork that's on the test. All right. So that's how I work in here. So RoboCop was a movie that came out in 1987. So you might be wondering, what's RoboCop got to do with art history? Well, let me introduce you to Peter Weller. He is the actor that plays RoboCop. Right. And Peter Weller got his master's in art history in 2004, got his doctorate in art history in 2014. So he is an official bona fide art historian. So my favorite art historian is RoboCop. Right. He's written articles that I've read. And so every time that I see Peter Weller, I think of RoboCop, but I also think of art history. And by the way, here he is teaching art history to students. All right, and so when you see RoboCop in my lectures, that is my stand-in for art historians. So this is a slide that we'll see sometime later on this semester, and where we'll talk about why or how Vincent van Gogh died. And so there's a lot of conspiracies about Van Gogh. And here is the art historian saying that no, these conspiracies are silly. He was just a tormented soul. So I kind of talk about what art historians say. So that's why you will see RoboCop pop up every now and then in my lectures. All right, so let's go to our lecture for today. Let's see, view. Let's do the slideshow from the beginning. All right, so much art history, never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. Chapter 20, late medieval and early Renaissance. As a reminder, in the header of your next empty page, which you've already done, I've already asked you to do that, write chapter 20, big and bold, so that when I'm grading your notes, it's easy for me to know which notes these belong to. Also a reminder, write the page number that you start this chapter on in your table of contents. So go back to your table of contents. If you're starting on page 58, then go to table of contents next to chapter 20, write page 58, etc. And also a reminder that for each chapter, as you take your notes, 5 little hand-drawn sketches per chapter. Don't spend a lot of time on these hand-drawn sketches. They could just be a few seconds long. They might no more than a minute long. Sometimes people draw the sketches as we go, and sometimes people will just take notes. And then when we're done and before they hand in their notes for grading, they'll draw all the pictures on one page. Either way is fine. Either way which works for you is fine. All right, so before we start, I have a couple of videos to show you. I talked about Buonfresco last semester. Buonfresco is painting on wet plaster on a wall. What is the opposite of Buonfresco? Fresco secco, yes. All right. The actual term is fresco secco, but we call it fresco secco because it sucks. All right. This guy is going to illustrate fresco for us.
It's known that his basic approach was a standard technique called buon fresco, which is still taught at places like this international conservation organization in Rome. The chief conservator is Paul Schwarzbaum, now with the Guggenheim Museum. He explains what has been learned from the restoration about Michelangelo's technique.
We're going to try and make a reproduction, if you will, to recreate the working technique of Michelangelo, the way he painted the frescoes of the Sistine ceiling. We're going to use the same materials, and we're going to try as best we can to, without Michelangelo, but to recreate his working technique. The materials that you see on the floor, we know from analysis, these are the materials that Michelangelo used to make his plaster.
The plaster is made from lime, water, and a brown volcanic ash called pozzolana. These are mixed into a smooth violet-colored paste. The plaster is applied to a surface prepared the day before called the origo. This fresh, wet layer, the intonaco, is applied just before painting.
The word fresco in Italian means fresh. And what it means is that we're painting on fresh plaster. The painter was obliged to work before the plaster dried. Now, this means that the plaster could only be applied little by little as the painter worked in terms of what he thought he might finish in a day or before lunch or what have you. There's a word in Italian which is called the giornata. We know from the cleaning of the Sistine that colors are very bright. And Michelangelo wanted these bright colors. To do that, we see that in certain areas he put on, at the very end, just before he painted, a very bright white, more white, let's say, very, very, very thin layer of preparation. But very rich in lime. Very thin. It would be a millimeter or two thick, what he's putting on now. Like a sheet of paper.
After the plaster is applied, the design is transferred using cartoons, drawings on paper. The contours of the figure are incised into the wet plaster, sometimes using a piece of wood. A different technique is used to outline the details around the face.
The other technique is called spolvero in Italian, and probably called the pouncing technique in English. We make a series of small holes along the lines in certain very key points. Michelangelo, we see, did the eyes, the nose, the ears, the throat. And then it takes a little sack of charcoal or some powdered pigment. And then you see the pigment goes through the holes and leaves the design on the fresco. So he has something to use as a guide for painting. You see, that would be how Michelangelo transferred his design. And with that, it gives you a base for painting.
Michelangelo mixed ground pigments with water. He used just 7 colors derived from minerals found in earthen clays. For his greens, he used green earth, ochres for his yellows and reds, and cobalt or lapis lazuli for the blues. When Michelangelo applied the colors to the wall, they had a translucent quality, like watercolor. But as the plaster dried, a process called carbonation took place. Carbon dioxide in the air combined with the lime in the plaster to form a hardened rock-like surface of calcium carbonate. As a result of this process, the pigment particles were cemented in place, becoming a part of the wall.
Standard fresco technique is a rather stable technique. When it's done well, it lasts thousands of years. We have Roman frescoes that are close to 2,000 years old.
But did Michelangelo vary the standard technique in any way, embellish it perhaps by adding any other layers of paint or blue varnish to the surface of the fresco? Unfortunately,
All right, that's the basics of a fresco. And I just want to remind you, it's painting on wet plaster. So it's wet paint on wet plaster, so the paint goes into the wall instead of just being on top of the wall.
in letters to his family.
All right, next, I'm going to show you guys how tempera paint works. Tempera paint is a fast drying paint using egg yolks. I use tempera paint here in my classroom. You can see right here, it says tempera right here, but this does not use egg yolks. So they've used other binders instead of egg yolks. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who liked using egg tempera, which is made from egg yolks. And have you guys ever smelled eggs when they go bad? What does it smell like? Yeah, right. It smells like a sewer, right? So, excuse me. When we would open the jars of paint in class, that's what it smelled like. All right, so this is how egg tempera is made and used.
La scelta della tecnica della tempera all'uovo risale agli anni 90 indicativamente. Precedentemente lavoravo ad acrilico, ma avevo grossi problemi, non avevo soddisfazione. Lavoravo su tavola e non mi piaceva, insomma, non era quello che cercavo. Su consiglio dell'amico Harry Salomon ho approfondito l'argomento della tempera all'uovo leggendo manuali e trattati, tra gli altri Codice Nino Cennini di Andigoni, il piccolo trattato di tecnica pittorica di De Chirico. Ho trovato la ricetta che meglio si adattava alle mie esigenze ed è quella che tuttora utilizzo con grande soddisfazione. E da quel momento ho deciso di prepararmi le tempere tutte le mattine in studio. È un lavoro molto dispendioso a livello di tempo, ma serve anche per calarsi nella realtà quotidiana del lavoro e quindi è un momento alla fine molto importante. Si chiama tempera all'uovo perché il legante che si utilizza per la preparazione del colore è rosso d'uovo. Allora, la ricetta è estremamente semplice. Si usa del rosso d'uovo, dell'acqua naturale e un antifermentativo. Allora, per prima cosa si separa il rosso d'uovo dal bianco. Dopodiché si buca la sacca del rosso e si cola in un vasetto. A quel punto io unisco un piccolo goccio d'acqua per rendere il rosso un po' meno vischioso, quindi un pochino più trattabile, e poi ci metto dell'antifermentativo. Fondamentalmente si uniscono il rosso d'uovo, il pigmento bagnato con dell'acqua,
That's the powdered pigment right there.
La mia ricetta si rifà a Cennino Cennini, che consiglia di unire in volume tanto rosso d'uovo quanto pigmento bagnato. E con una spatola vengono uniti, vengono mesticati su una lastra di onice. Io in particolare uso una lastra d'onice alla quale sono molto affezionato, che mi è stata regalata un bel po' di tempo fa, ma va benissimo anche una lastra di vetro. Il rosso d'uovo, una volta asciutto veramente, quindi dopo che hai fatto passare qualche mese, il film di rosso d'uovo non riviene più, quindi diventa come plastica, si plastifica. Quando si acquistano i pigmenti, qui parliamo di terre naturali, come caratteristica è quella di asciugare molto.
All right, you saw him make the paint, so we're going to move on to then oil paint. Let's do oil paint. It's a slow drying paint used.
Traditional oil paint was made from a simple combination of two ingredients. The first is the binder, the material that glues the colored particles to the canvas or panel. In oil paint, the binder is a drying oil, a fluid that absorbs oxygen from the air and becomes a solid film over time. The most common drying oil was flax oil, usually called linseed oil. It was pressed from the seeds collected from the flax plant, like those shown here. The same plant was used as the source for the fibers used to make linen canvases. Here's a sample of linseed oil. The other ingredient is the pigment. This is an insoluble powder which provides the color to the paint. Pigments were derived from a number of sources. Historically, a large percentage of pigments were made by grinding natural earths containing iron oxides. Here we see a lump of red earth and red earth pigment made from a similar sample. Other pigments were made from ground up minerals, simple chemical reactions, and even from extracts from plants and bugs. This engraving from around 1600 shows a painter's studio in the early 17th century. A detail depicts the artist's assistants preparing oil paint. Here we see red earth being placed on a granite slab. A little linseed oil is then added in increments. It's important to add only enough to create a stiff, barely workable paste. Excess linseed oil will cause the resultant paint to become yellow-brown over time. The quantity of oil needed to make a good paint differs with each color depending on pigment size, morphology, and chemical reactivity. This makes it difficult to simply follow formulas for the small-scale production of paint. Additionally, the paint maker may want to make a paint of a specific consistency for a particular painterly effect. This stiff paste is then worked with a muller to fully disperse the pigments into the linseed oil binder. Slabs and mullers were originally made from granite or porphyry. Glass mullers and plates were used later. Today, oil paints are made in large industrial roller mills. The paste of pigment and oil must be mulled for many minutes before it becomes a usable paint. The paint maker needs to continue to remove paste from the edges of the muller and redistribute it so that it can be properly mulled and the pigments fully dispersed in the binder. Our paint maker is using a figure-8 motion as an economical way to effectively mull the paint. As the paste is worked, it loosens up and becomes more glossy. This is evidence of the pigments becoming fully dispersed. The paint maker may find that the paint is too loose and additional pigment needs to be added and mulled again, or it may require a touch more oil to be just right. Each pigment will also create a paint with individual physical characteristics. Some are short and buttery, while others are long and runny. This video was created for the Art Conservation Department at the University of Delaware. I'm Assistant.
Okay, so I showed you these 3 videos to show you the 3 basic ways of painting at the time that we are studying. Now, I've shown you like how they're making these paint. Does this seem efficient to you? Like if you wanted to just paint, could you just paint, pick up a brush and start painting? No, yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of time to make the paint. With these artists, we're talking about a big studio. In fact, you saw the picture in that video right there of the artist studio, and they had assistants off to the side making paint. So these artists that we're going to be talking about had a lot of assistants helping them, and some of those assistants, their only job is to make paint. And I also heard him say right here is that it can't be made like it can't be mass made. They're working with small quantities. So if I need to only paint just a little bit of blue in this painting, I need to make a little bit of blue paint. So I'm making small quantities of paint. So it has to be I have to know exactly how many drops of this, how much powder of that, etc. to put into there. And it's really can't be mass produced at this time. We're going to get later on the semester a huge technological invention of a tube of paint. Like, this right here, what I'm holding right now is a bottle of paint. And this saves me so much time that I can just open this bottle and start painting rather than have to spend many minutes or even hours making paint. All right, so our first work of art is going to take us to Burgundy. Where is Burgundy? You ever heard of Burgundy as a country before? You've heard of France and Italy and Greece. We already went over that. All right, Burgundy and Flanders. You can see it there on the map. It's kind of in between Germany and France. All right, we're going to look at, so I'm going to teach you a couple new words. One is a triptych. So in this image right here, you can see that the painting is closed on the left and open on the right. So it is on a hinge and it folds in. So we have one painting on the closed side, and then when you open it up, there's three more paintings. There's a painting on the left panel, a painting in the center panel, and a painting on the right panel. So we're going to take a look at this painting right here, which is a what? It's a triptych. How can you tell? You can see the three panels. That's right. So if we get closer, we can see these three panels a little bit more. Now, in Burgundy and Flanders at this time, there was increased wealth. A lot of trading is going on, and there's a lot more commissions for paintings for people to use as aids in their prayer at home. For example, is that a big painting? It is a relatively small painting. We've been looking at the medieval era, and these are huge mosaics and huge paintings. We looked at a couple of altar pieces that are absolutely giant, the size of a person or bigger. So now this is a small painting, so it belongs in the home. So somebody commissioned this to be on display in their house. And how are we doing on time? So we're on source schedule today. Say that again. Is it Wednesday that we're on source schedule? Okay, thank you. All right, so it's meant to be a painting inside their house, and this is a very religious image. So it is a painting used in the home to aid in prayer. But if we look a little bit closer, like at this one right here, I'm going to go back. Before we get to the center panel, we're going to talk about the outer panels. All right, on the left, you can see that that's labeled as donors. Remember in the medieval era, we had donor portraits where they had a little tiny building in their hand, and that was the building that you were standing in when looking at that picture. And basically they're saying, look, I paid for this building. Now we're beginning to get that into these paintings, especially in a triptych. We have the main image in the middle, and the paintings on the sides will show the donors. So, and the donors are almost always seen as kneeling. In fact, that's how we know that those two people on the left are donors, is because they are kneeling. The donors are in an enclosed garden, and the enclosed garden is a symbol of Mary's virginity. On the right, we have Joseph, the carpenter. He's making mousetraps, which is a metaphor for God's justice. And he has a saw and an axe in front of him. We'll see a closer version of this. And that is predicting the crucifixion. The center panel is an image called the Annunciation. We saw this a lot in the medieval era, in the frescoes. Now we see it in this little oil painting. The Annunciation is Gabriel telling Mary that she would give birth to Jesus. Now, look at this place. Where are they? Does it look like a living room to you? Right? It's kind of a living room. And the reason why it's a living room is so because this is where it's going to go. You want the painting to reference the place that it's going to be on display in. All right, I have a question for you. How do you make something look 3D when it's on a 2D surface? Yeah, depth. That's called perspective. Write that down. I spent a lot of time on this first semester. Did the Egyptians use perspective? No, they did not use perspective. The Romans tried to use it. Check this out. They could see that things go back into space, but they didn't quite get it. It was a good try, but they just didn't get it. The Byzantine didn't do it. There's no perspective here. The Romanesque artists didn't do it. And so, what that gives us is this shallow sense of space. So, like when you have mannequins in a storefront, they are bound by a wall in front of them and a glass in front of them and a wall behind them. It gives them a very shallow space. Like being on the ledge, you have a very shallow space. And that's what I think of every time I'm looking at these, especially the Egyptians. All right, I think of that very shallow space that they are all next to each other. Almost nobody is in front of the other person. It's very rare in Egyptian art, and it's quite rare in the Byzantine and Romanesque art as well. All right, so perspective truly begins in the Renaissance. And what we're looking at here is linear perspective. What does linear mean? Lines, that's right. If you stand on railroad tracks and look down the railroad tracks, it looks like the railroad tracks meet in the distance. But they never do. If you were to walk down those railroad tracks, they never meet. It's a visual oddity. As things go away from you, they get smaller. Or they seem to get smaller. They don't actually get smaller. What are you, the center of the universe? All right, and you can see linear perspective when you walk down the halls of school. I need to get a picture of our school for this slide. And you can see the lines of perspective when you go down the streets. And you can even see it in your bedroom. So this is linear perspective. I want you to know this term right here, orthogonal lines. It will be in green later on, but might as well write it down. And there's another type of perspective called isometric perspective. You find it a lot in video games. And that's where you're looking at down at a 3/4 angle, not directly down. But the lines never meet in the distance. They just go at a 45-degree angle forever. The Renaissance artists did not use isometric perspective, but it just might show up on a test. So I want you to know what it is. We also have atmospheric perspective. Which mountains are farthest away? Yeah, the ones that are lighter. Why is that? Why do things as they go back into the distance get lighter? It's because there's more air between you and those things that are farther away. And the more air, because air is made out of water vapor and dust and gases and all kinds of stuff. So the more distance there is between you and objects, the more air that you have to look through. the more water vapor and gases and dust that you have to look through to see it. And we can definitely see it in Renaissance art. Renaissance artists understand atmospheric perspective. In this Leonardo da Vinci painting, you can see in the upper left-hand corner the mountains in the distance. As they go back into the distance, they get lighter. Now, coming back to the Marodi altarpiece, can you find orthogonals in this image? All right, you can find it where the wall meets the floor in the lower left. In the top of the painting, the lines that are in the rafters and the ceiling. On the right side, we have the bench. The top of the bench is an orthogonal. In the fireplace, we have lines that are orthogonals. So that helps us give a sense of space. However, doesn't it look odd? Doesn't the space look a little bit cramped? Like it's a little bit tilted? Doesn't that table look tilted? And the bench looks a little bit tilted? It looks like if I were to stand in that room, I would lose my balance. So here, while they are making the lines go to a single vanishing point in the distance, they still don't quite get it. They're much closer than the Romans, but there's still an oddness about the space that's in here. All right, drapery. This is a big concept I want you to understand of the difference between the Northern Renaissance, is what we're looking at, and the Italian Renaissance, which we'll look at soon. One of the big dead giveaways of the Northern Renaissance, one way you can absolutely tell that it's Northern Renaissance and not Italian Renaissance, is if everybody's clothes look like origami. Sharp folds in paper. That's one of the clues that gives away Northern Renaissance. I'm quite certain I will ask you on the test, I'll show you a picture and ask you to be able to identify, is this Northern Renaissance or Italian Renaissance? In fact, that might be a good unknown for you. That'd be one of the... All right, another dead giveaway for Northern Renaissance is details, details, details. Look at the details. The details are absolutely incredible in Northern Renaissance. The space is wrong, but the details are absolutely amazing. Look at the nails on this door. How they have bits of rust, like it's been rained on for many years, and the rust is dripping down from the nail. Oh, that's it. We'll stop. We'll pick up right here tomorrow.